The first time I ever saw the town, I thought it was abandoned. It was the middle of summer, the kind of day when the air clings to your lungs like damp cloth. I'd been driving for hours along a cracked, forgotten highway in the middle of nowhere. My phone had no signal. My car was running low on gas. And the nearest sign of civilization was a rust-bent road marker pointing toward a place called Ashgrove. I should have kept driving, but something about the silence of the road ahead. It pulled me toward that town. Ashgrove wasn't on any map I'd ever seen. And as I rolled down the single main street, I noticed right away what was wrong. The people. They were there standing in shop doorways, watering dry flower beds, even sitting at a diner counter through the window. But none of them were speaking. None of them looked at me. Their eyes were glassy, their faces slack, as if they were waiting for something. I parked near the gas station. The attendant was already outside. A man in oil-stained overalls with a head of gray hair that looked like it had never known a comb. He met me halfway, but didn't say a word, not even a hello. He just raised his hand in a stiff, slow gesture, pointing toward the pump. "Hi there," I said, trying to break the ice. "Do you take cash?" His face didn't change. His mouth didn't move. He just nodded once. The silence pressed down on me like weight. Even the cicadas, which had been buzzing along the highway, seemed to vanish here. The whole town was too quiet. Like a vacuum had swallowed the sound from the air. I filled the tank, all the while feeling his stare fixed on me. "Thanks," I said when I was done. "Could you point me toward a motel?" He turned, lifted one hand, and pointed again the road. Not a word. I told myself maybe the town was just quirky. Maybe it was one of those places where everyone kept to themselves. Maybe it was me being tired, paranoid, hungry. I decided to stay the night and move on in the morning. The motel was at the edge of town. A 2-story box of peeling paint and dim neon that buzzed but gave off no real light. Behind the front desk sat a woman with hair the color of burnt straw. She smiled politely, but didn't speak. Just slid a key across the counter. That's when I noticed something strange. Her smile never reached her eyes. They looked hollow. I took the key, forcing a nervous laugh. "Not much of a talkative town, huh?" She tilted her head like she'd heard me but couldn't toward WOULD and single quotes T- replied. The silence followed me into the room. Old wallpaper, creaky bed, a lamp with a yellow bulb. It felt like the whole place had been left untouched for decades. I tried to sleep that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The silence was too thick. I even switched on the TV. But it was nothing but static, and then, just after midnight, heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Low, wet, guttural. Something moving in the streets outside, breaking the silence, and suddenly, I understood. The town wasn't quiet because its people couldn't speak. They were quiet because something else didn't want them to. I froze in my bed. The sheets clutched tight in my fists. The sound outside was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Something between a growl and a wet gasp. A noise that seemed to claw at the air itself. I told myself it was just an animal. Maybe a stray dog. Maybe a coyote. But the noise didn't drift past like something wandering. No, it lingered. It scraped along the walls, pacing back and forth across the motel parking lot. I slid out of bed and crept toward the window. The curtains were thin, brittle things, but I only parted them a sliver. And there it was. Not a dog. Not a coyote. Something tall, hunched, and wrong. Its limbs bent in ways that didn't look possible. Its skin was pale, mottled with patches of shadow, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to be flesh or smoke. It moved on all fours, but rose too high when it stretched up, its head scraping against the overhang of the motel roof. But the worst part was its mouth. It hung open too wide, slack like the rest of the townsfolk's expressions. But inside was no tongue. No teeth, just a dark cavern where sound seemed to drip out like blood. That wet, ragged growl came from there, rolling into the night air like a disease. I stumbled back from the window, heart hammering. My first thought was to grab my bag and run, but where would I go? The whole town was infected with silence. Every set of eyes I'd seen that day had the same empty glaze. And now, hearing this thing outside, I realized something terrifying. They weren't silent because they wanted to be. They were silent because they were hiding. The footsteps stopped. The growl choked off mid-breath. I covered my mouth, holding back the sound of my own panicked breathing. Slowly, carefully, I eased down to the floor, pressing myself against the side of the bed. Minutes passed. Long, heavy minutes. Then, faintly, I heard another sound. A knock, not at my door. Somewhere else. A soft, deliberate tapping that echoed across the hallway outside my room. 3 knocks. Then silence. Another 3. Then silence. Like a signal, I couldn't take it. I had to see. I cracked open my door just a hair and peered into the hallway. The motel's other doors were shut tight. But halfway down the corridor, one door was opening slowly, carefully. A man stepped out wearing nothing but wrinkled pajamas. His eyes darted left and right, his face pale with fear. He didn't make a sound. He didn't dare to. And then, before I could blink, the pale thing was there. It lunged from the stairwell, impossibly fast, its limbs contorting like broken marionette strings. It grabbed the man before he could even gasp. The only sound that followed was a muffled thud as his body was dragged out of sight. I slammed my door shut, back pressed against it, trembling in silence. Now I understood why the townsfolk didn't speak. Why no one greeted me. Why no laughter or chatter or even whispers filled Ashgrove. Because the moment you made a sound in this town, that thing would come for you. Asterisk, I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing's mouth hanging open, saw its body folding and unfolding as it dragged the man away into the dark. My heart beat so loud, I worried it might betray me. The silence pressed tighter, heavier, like the walls themselves were listening. When morning came, sunlight crept through the curtains, and I thought for a moment, just a moment, that maybe I dreamed it. Maybe the exhaustion had gotten to me, but then I opened the door. The hallway, where I'd seen the man dragged off, looked scrubbed clean. No blood, no broken doorframe, nothing to suggest anyone had been there at all. The motel itself was as still and muted as the day before. Downstairs, the woman at the desk was already sitting stiff in her chair, hands folded neatly, eyes unfocused. She didn't blink when I passed. I stepped outside into the main street, desperate for some sign of normalcy. Shops stood open. People milled about. A man swept his porch. A woman hung laundry. Children chased each other, except there was no sound. No chatter, no laughter, not even the scuff of shoes against pavement. It was like watching life on mute. I tried to speak. "Good morning," I said softly. Testing the air, every head turned toward me at once. Not fast, not violent, just in unison. Their glassy eyes locked on mine. Their mouths remained slack, their faces drained of any expression. And for a heartbeat, the whole town stood still. I swallowed hard and forced a smile. Sorry. Didn't mean to." One of them raised a hand. A warning. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He pressed a finger to his mouth. Silence. I shut my own lips and nodded quickly, backing away. Slowly, the townsfolk lowered their gazes and returned to their motions, as if nothing had happened. I wanted to run, but where? My car was full of gas now, but the idea of driving through miles of empty road with that thing out there at night made my stomach twist. Instead, I ducked into the diner. The bell above the door should have rung, but it didn't. Inside, a handful of people sat at tables, forks scraping against plates, but even those sounds were swallowed. A waitress in a faded uniform slid a menu toward me. I whispered, "Coffee, please." She froze. The whole diner froze. Then she scribbled something on her notepad and slid it across the table. "Don't speak. Not here." Her hand trembled as she pushed the note to me, her eyes darting toward the windows. And that's when I realized it. The silence wasn't just habit. It wasn't fear of each other. It was survival. The thing wasn't just hunting. Sounded it was drawn to voices. 2 words. I pressed the note back and nodded, my throat dry. I didn't say another word, but deep inside, a terrible question was clawing at me. What had happened to this town? And why hadn't I seen anyone try to leave? I stayed in the diner longer than I should have. Every sip of coffee felt like it was amplified in my ears, like the sound alone might summon something through the walls. Nobody in the diner looked at me, but I could feel their awareness, like every eye was waiting for me to slip up. When I finished, a waitress came by with the check. She didn't say a word. Instead, she slipped me another note. "Don't stay. Not tonight." The letters were jagged, hurried, like she'd written it with shaking hands. I looked up at her, and for the first time, her eyes weren't hollow, they were pleading. I left cash on the table and walked outside. The day was bright, almost too bright, but the silence weighed heavier than ever. I couldn't stand it. I needed answers. I made my way toward the small library I'd seen earlier on the edge of town. The windows were coated with dust, the sign warped from rain. Inside, rows of books sat like tombstones, untouched for years. Behind the desk was an old man with round glasses. He stared at me when I walked in, and before I could say a word, he lifted a finger to his lips. Then he slid open a drawer and pulled out a notebook. He scribbled something down and pushed it across the counter. "Why are you here?" I hesitated, then wrote back, "Passing through." My car needed gas. His jaw tightened. He wrote again, "You should have kept driving." My hand shook as I wrote, "What's happening here?" The old man's eyes darted toward the door, then back to me. He scribbled, "It comes at night. Always at night. It listens. It feeds." He underlined the word "feeds" 3 times, the pencil nearly tearing the page. I started to write another question, but he snatched the notebook back and shoved it into the drawer. His face had gone pale. He mouthed one word, soundless but clear, quiet. The front door creaked open. 2 men walked in. Not townsfolk. These men were different. Their clothes were dusty, their boots scuffed from travel. Outsiders like me. But unlike me, their faces carried no fear. One of them carried a small recorder. They spoke out loud. "See?" One said, holding the recorder high. Dead quiet. Just like the stories. My stomach dropped. The old man's face drained of all color. The second man laughed, his voice echoing through the library. "What's the big deal? Just a bunch of weirdos too scared to talk. No monster here." The words had barely left his mouth before I heard it, the faintest sound, like a low, dragging breath seeping through the cracks in the walls. The old man shoved me hard toward the back of the library, his finger stabbing toward a trapdoor behind the shelves. His eyes screamed one thing: hide. The 2 men didn't notice. They were still laughing, still talking, their voices booming in the unnatural quiet. And then the windows shook, a shadow slid across the floor, and something began to crawl through the doorway. I ducked behind the shelves, heart hammering, watching through a crack as the pale, hunched figure unfolded itself into the library. The outsiders went silent at last, but not by choice. It was already on them. I crouched behind the shelves. Every muscle in my body locked stiff. The pale thing filled the library doorway, its limbs bending, folding, cracking as it squeezed through. Its head twitched with sharp, unnatural jerks, mouth yawning wide like a door to nowhere. The two outsiders froze. For a second, they looked like they might bolt, but they didn't. They stood there, staring, too stunned to move. The creature leaned toward them, sniffing the air with a wet, guttural rasp. And then it lunged. I'll never forget the sound not from the creature, but from them. A scream ripped raw and desperate, echoing louder than anything I'd heard since coming to Ashgrove. It was a mistake the moment the scream filled the room. The thing went into a frenzy. It bent and snapped in ways that didn't seem possible, dragging one man into its cavernous mouth without even biting, just swallowing him into that darkness. His voice cut off mid-scream. The other tried to run, but the creature was faster. Its arms shot out, unnaturally long, slamming him against the shelves so hard the wood splintered. Then it dragged him close, mouth stretching wider, wider until his head disappeared inside. No blood, no body, just silence. I covered my mouth, biting down hard on my own tongue to keep from gasping. The taste of iron filled my mouth, but it was better than making a sound. The creature twitched violently, almost spasming. Then, slowly, it straightened. Its head cocked, turning toward where I hid. I didn't breathe. The thing leaned close to the shelves, its shadow falling across me. Its mouth opened, and that same wet growl poured out, vibrating the air. Then suddenly it snapped its head away, as if something had called it. The sound of footsteps outside. Dozens of them. Heavy, steady. The townsfolk I peered through the crack as they gathered at the doorway, all standing perfectly still. Their eyes were empty, but their presence seemed to hold the creature at bay. It let out a shriek, low, grating, like metal dragged across stone, then slipped back through the doorway and into the sunlight. The townsfolk followed, slow and deliberate, like a procession. And then, just like that, the library was still again. I stayed crouched for what felt like hours. When I finally dared to move, the old librarian was gone. The only evidence of the outsiders was the recorder lying cracked on the floor, its red light still blinking. I picked it up with trembling hands. The last recording was their voices, laughing, mocking. Then the sound of the creature's growl. Then screams, and then silence. I shoved the recorder into my bag. Because some part of me knew I was in the middle of something far bigger than I understood. I didn't just stumble into a strange town. I'd walked straight into its prison. I left the library shaken, clutching the broken recorder like a lifeline. The sunlight outside should have comforted me, but instead it felt like a cruel trick. The town looked the same as before, people moving about their daily routines in absolute silence. But I'd seen too much. I knew better. I walked quickly, my eyes darting toward every shadow, every corner where the creature might lurk. The townsfolk didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling they knew I'd seen it at the end of the street. I spotted the gas station where I'd first stopped. The old attendant stood outside again, motionless, like he'd been waiting for me all along. I approached carefully. "I need to know what's happening," I whispered. His head snapped toward me so sharply I flinched. His mouth twitched, but no words came. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small pad of paper, and scribbled a message. "Night belongs to it. Day belongs to us. Do not break the balance." I frowned. Balance? What balance? He hesitated, then wrote again. "We feed it. We silence it. We survive." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Feed it," I whispered. "With what?" His eyes flicked to the cracked recorder in my hand. Then he tore the page free, crumpled it, and stuffed it into his pocket. He scribbled one last line and shoved it at me, his hands shaking. "Leave before dark." I opened my mouth to argue, but he slammed the pad shut and turned his back on me. Conversation over. I stood there for a long moment, my pulse roaring in my ears. Feed it, silence it, survive. That explained the townsfolk. The lifeless eyes, the mute routines. They weren't living, they were enduring. But something didn't add up if they fed it. Then who? That thought stalked me all the way back to the motel. I locked myself in my room, pulled the curtains shut, and replayed the recorder again and again. The outsiders' laughter, their taunts, the things growl, and then silence. Not a single trace of them remained. By dusk, I was pacing the floor. The sun dipped low, shadows stretching long across the walls. My instincts screamed at me to run, to drive until the road ended. But the memory of that creature's speed kept me rooted. Then dash, just as the last light bled out. Heard it again. The knock. 3 sharp raps. Echoing down the hallway, I froze, back pressed to the door. Another set of knocks answered from further away. Then another, like a pattern spreading through the motel. And then footsteps, slow, dragging, coming closer. My throat tightened. I knew what was waiting out there. But what chilled me most wasn't the sound of the creature. It was the realization that the townsfolk weren't just hiding from it. They were helping it hunt. The knocks grew louder, closer, until they seemed to crawl across the walls of my room. I pressed my ear to the door. The footsteps dragged past, slow and deliberate, like something sniffing the air for sound. My chest burned from holding my breath. Then, faintly, I heard the whisper of movement outside. Not the creature. Lighter. Human. Someone slipped a folded note under my door. With trembling hands, I opened it. "If you want to live, follow me." Now, I hesitated. A trap. Another way the townsfolk fed their monster. But the footsteps were circling back, heavier this time, scraping against the walls like claws. I didn't have a choice. I eased the door open. The hallway was dim, lit only by a dying bulb that buzzed faintly, almost swallowed by the silence. At the far end, a figure motioned to me. The waitress from the diner. Her face was pale in the dark, eyes wide with fear. She pressed her finger to her lips, then waved urgently. I crept after her, careful not to let my shoes squeak on the floorboards. Behind us, the knock came again, this time at my door. The waitress pulled me into the stairwell, shutting the door behind us with agonizing slowness. We descended into the basement, where the air grew damp and stale. The walls were lined with old pipes and broken furniture. But at least the noise above was muffled. She pulled out a flashlight, wrapped in cloth to dim the beam, and handed me another note. "You don't understand. This town isn't alive. It's surviving. We can't leave." I scrawled back, my hands shaking. "Why not?" Her eyes filled with something between sorrow and terror. She wrote, "It follows. Always. Once you've spoken here, it hears you forever." I nearly dropped the pen. "You mean, even if I leave?" I whispered, unable to stop myself. Her face twisted with horror. She clapped her hand over my mouth so fast it made my head snap back. Her other hand pointed to the ceiling. The footsteps had stopped. Then slowly the pipes above us began to groan. A low vibration rattled the walls, as though the building itself was holding its breath. She let go, tears brimming in her eyes, and scribbled furiously on the pad. "Now it knows you. It will never stop." I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My throat locked. The silence of the town wasn't just survival-y, was a sentence. The waitress grabbed my wrist and pulled me through the basement toward a rusted door that led outside. We emerged into the night air, the moon pale and swollen above. The streets were empty, every house dark. every window shut tight. But I could feel it. Somewhere out there in the silence, the creature was listening. And now? It was listening for me. The night in Ashgrove was suffocating. The air carried no crickets. No wind, no distant hum of engines. Just silence, thick, unnatural silence that pressed into my ears like cotton. Every step I took felt too loud, even though my shoes barely touched the ground. The waitress kept tugging me along, her pale face glistening with sweat. She led me behind the rows of shuttered houses, across a dead field, and toward the tree line. When we were deep enough in the dark that the town was just a shape behind us, she finally crouched low and scribbled another note with her trembling hand. It's older than the town, older than anyone remembers. We don't even know if it was human once. She shoved the paper at me. I scribbled back quickly. Then why not leave? You said it follows, but maybe. She shook her head violently, snatching the paper and writing furiously. We tried. My family, others. It found us. It always finds us. Her hand stopped. Her eyes went distant, like she was remembering something too painful to relive. Then she forced herself to write again. It doesn't just kill. It takes piece by piece, until nothing's left. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. What about you? I whispered before I could stop myself. She froze, eyes darting toward the trees, and then I heard it. That sound. That wet, guttural rasp rolling low through the darkness. The waitress grabbed my wrist so hard, her nails dug into my skin. She yanked me toward the trees, shoving me ahead of her. We ran. Branches clawed at my arms and face, the ground uneven beneath my feet. But no matter how fast we moved, the sound followed, dragging, rasping. Closer with every step. The woods thinned, opening into a clearing where a small, rotting church slouched against the moonlight. The waitress shoved me inside, slamming the heavy door behind us. The air smelled of mildew and rot. Pews lay broken across the floor, and the altar was stained with something dark. She struck a match and lit a single candle, the flame barely enough to fight the shadows. Then she wrote on another scrap of paper, "This is the only place it won't cross. Sacred ground. It waits outside." I stared at her, shaking. "Why are you helping me?" I whispered. Her eyes softened for the first time. She scribbled one word, then handed me the note. "Brother." My stomach dropped. "What?" She pointed to a cracked photograph on the wall. A family portrait, faded by time. A girl who looked just like her. And a boy standing beside her. The boy was one of the outsiders I'd seen dragged into the monster's mouth. Her hand shook as she scribbled again. "It took him. I can't let it take you too." Before I could reply, the candle flickered. The rasp outside grew louder, circling the church, and the heavy wooden doors began to bend. Asterisk, the wooden doors shuddered, groaning under the weight of something pressing against them. Dust rained down from the rafters, and a single candle sputtered in its wax. The waitress grabbed my arm, shoving me behind a splintered pew. Her eyes were wide, her lips trembling with the one thing she dared not release. A scream, the rasp outside dragged across the church walls, like claws raking through the stone. It circled, slow, deliberate, testing the boundary. I pressed myself low, fighting the urge to breathe too loud. My chest ached, my throat burned. But I stayed silent, and then it stopped. The silence returned, heavier than ever. Like the whole world had frozen. I risked a glance toward the candle, its flame quivering in the still air. That's when I saw its shadows stretching across the floor. Not from the creature, from people, the townsfolk, one by one. They filed silently through a side door I hadn't even noticed, slipping into the church-like shadows themselves. Their faces were blank, their eyes hollow, their steps in perfect rhythm. The waitress stiffened beside me, horror filling her gaze. She scribbled on the notepad with a shaking hand and shoved it at me. "They're not here to help." The townsfolk moved in unison, surrounding the altar. One of them, a tall man in a black coat, stepped forward. He carried something in his hands, a rusted bell. Without a word, he raised it. The moment the bell rang, the sound cut through me like a blade. It was the first real sound I'd heard in this town besides the creature's growl. Low, metallic, vibrating. The waitress clutched my hand, her nails digging into my skin. The doors of the church buckled. And then slowly, impossibly, the creature stepped inside. I gasped. But the sound was swallowed by the toll of the bell. The townsfolk didn't flinch. They parted, forming a path, their hollow eyes fixed forward as the thing moved between them. The waitress scrawled desperately, her handwriting jagged. "They don't just feed it strangers. They worship it." The thing's head twisted unnaturally, snapping toward us. Its mouth opened wide, the darkness inside stretching deeper than space itself. The bell rang again, and suddenly, every single townsfolk turned toward me. Their mouths opened in unison, and for the first time since I'd arrived. The silence shattered not with words, not with screams, but with a single, collective breath, a whisper, all at once, from every throat in the room. "Yours, asterisk," the word hissed through the church like a curse, echoing from every hollow mouth. My blood turned to ice. The waitress gripped my arm, shaking her head violently, mouthing, "Run." But where? The doors were blocked by the creature, its limbs stretching unnaturally across the stone floor. The bell tolled again, vibrating through my bones. The townsfolk dropped to their knees as though in prayer, eyes locked on the monster that filled their sanctuary. It leaned forward, its cavernous mouth opening wider, wider still, like it meant to swallow not just me, but the very air around me. Panic tore through me. I yanked the cracked recorder from my bag and, without thinking, hit play. The outsider's laughter burst into the silence, loud, jarring, out of place. The creature convulsed, its body twisted violently, spasming at the sound. The bell ringer shouted wordlessly, face breaking into rage for the first time. But the damage was done. The waitress seized the moment. She grabbed a chunk of broken pew and hurled it at the stained glass window. The crash rang out like thunder. The creature shrieked a sound so loud it rattled my teeth. Turned on her? No. I screamed before I could stop myself. It lunged. The waitress didn't run. She stood her ground, tears in her eyes, and mouthed one word to me: "Go." The monster swallowed her in an instant, her body vanishing into its endless dark. The townsfolk wailed not with grief, but with devotion, their cries echoing like a hymn. I didn't think. I dove through the shattered glass, hitting the ground hard outside. Pain tore through my arm, but I forced myself up, running into the night. Behind me, the bell tolled again. The creature's growl followed, echoing across the silent town. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, slamming myself inside. The engine roared to life. I sped down the empty highway, not daring to look back. But the silence came with me, even as the road stretched out ahead. Even as the horizon bled into dawn, I could still hear it, the faintest rasp, crawling beneath the sound of the engine. The waitress's words burned in my mind. "Once you've spoken here, it hears you forever." I thought I'd escaped Ashgrove, but deep down, I knew the truth. The town hadn't been silent because of the creature. The silence was the only thing keeping it contained, and now it was following me, asterisk, asterisk, and ... That's a wrap. A huge thank you to everyone for watching. This channel is nothing without this amazing community. If you have ideas for future videos, drop them down in the comments below. As always, subscribe if you're new here. Until next time, take care.